Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we are going to be looking at a book called Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps
Okay.
by Allan and Barbara Pease. Have you ever heard of this book?
Yeah, I have actually read this one. You've read this one.
It's a pretty popular one.
Yeah, it's a pretty popular one, and it's a little bit controversial.
It can be, yeah.
But we're not going to shy away from controversy in these deep dives. So we're going to dive right in
Let's do it.
and look at some of the points in here. And I think what's interesting about this book is that it doesn't just say, oh, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, or here are these stereotypes. It actually goes into like the evolutionary biology and some brain research as to why these things might actually be true.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so interesting. It's not just, like you said, kind of these broad stereotypes that we all kind of know, but they really do delve into the science behind it. And that's what makes it so fascinating. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the things that they talk about in here. One of the first things that they really dig into is like going way back to like hunter-gatherer times.
Okay.
And they're saying that because of evolution and because of what men had to do as hunters and what women had to do sort of as the nest defenders, they're saying that our brains have developed differently.
Right. And that's one of the main premises of the book is that like men and women are fundamentally different. And this goes back to, like you said, thousands and thousands of years to this kind of division of labor that we had.
Right.
And so the men were out hunting and the women were taking care of the home and the children. And that over time actually changed the way our brains work.
Right. Exactly. So, for instance, men needed to be able to like have tunnel vision,
Right.
when they were hunting. They needed to be able to focus on a target.
Mm.
They needed to be able to have spatial awareness for, aiming a spear or something like that.
Right.
And they needed to be able to navigate, terrain and track things and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so they're saying that, in modern times, this translates to like men not being able to find the butter in the refrigerator,
Right.
because they're so focused.
You got that tunnel vision.
Forget that tunnel vision.
Yeah, that's one of their examples that they use.
Yeah.
They're like, men can't find anything in the refrigerator because
Yeah,
they're not looking at the whole picture.
They're looking for the thing.
Yeah, right.
Right. And women, on the other hand, they were, defending the nest. And so they needed to have like 360-degree awareness.
Right.
They needed to be aware of like what was going on everywhere.
Yeah.
And so their peripheral vision is better. They are more aware of their surroundings.
Right. And they're taking in more information.
Right.
In general.
Yes. And they're saying that even when men and women are at rest,
Okay.
that a woman's brain is still constantly processing information.
Interesting.
Whereas a man's brain can shut down like 70% when they're not actively engaged in something.
So it's like a power saving mode almost
Right.
for men.
Yeah. So
Fascinating.
women are just kind of like always on
Always on. Yeah.
and taking in information.
Yeah.
And so, that explains like why sometimes, a woman might be like, hey, honey, did you see how that guy looked at me?
Right.
And the guy's like, what guy?
Yeah. I didn't see anything.
Right. Because he wasn't paying attention to that.
He was zoned out.
He was zoned out. He was on power saving mode.
Yeah. It's like the screensaver came on.
Exactly.
For the brain.
Yeah.
And it plays into communication too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because women are taking in all this information. They're
Right.
also processing it. And they're more attuned to like nonverbal cues and emotional nuances. So they can pick up on things that men might completely miss.
Yeah. Like they say that women are better at reading body language and facial expressions.
Exactly. And it's not that men don't care. It's just that their brains aren't necessarily wired for that constant emotional processing.
Right. It's not necessarily a conscious choice. It's just how they're
Yeah. It's how they're wired.
wired.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So then they go into talking about the brain.
Go ahead.
And they're saying that the areas of the brain
Okay.
that are responsible for speech and language are actually larger in women's brains.
Interesting. So there is like a physical difference in the brain that's accounting for this.
Yeah, and especially in the left hemisphere.
Oh, yeah.
Which is the hemisphere that is usually associated with communication and verbal skills.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Right. And so they're saying that because of this, women tend to be better communicators.
Right.
They can multitask better verbally. And they can learn languages more easily.
It's interesting how all of this ties back to that original like hunter-gatherer division of labor.
It does.
Because if you think about it, like the women were the ones who were like teaching the children language and communicating with the other women in the group. And
so it makes sense that their brains would have developed in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they give the example of like watching a movie.
Okay.
And they're saying that like women can watch a movie and follow all the different storylines and the characters, like what's going on, whereas men tend to like zone in on one thing.
Yeah.
And they might miss
Right.
some of the nuances of the detail.
Subtleties.
Yeah.
No.
So that's kind of interesting. And then, of course, we have to talk about men not being able to read maps,
Oh, yeah, that's a class.
which is in the title of the book.
That's right.
Right.
Well,
So they're saying that, again, this goes back to the hunter-gatherer roles,
okay.
where men needed to have, like, really good spatial awareness.
Right. Like for tracking animals and finding their way back home.
Right. So they had to be able to, like, visualize things in 3D.
Right.
They had to be able to, like, think about, how to get from one place to another.
Yeah. Navigate.
And so they're saying that men are generally better
Okay.
at spatial tasks
Yeah.
than women. And this is something that has been shown in research.
So it's not just a stereotype. There's actually evidence to back it up.
There is evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
And they're saying that this is because of the right hemisphere of the brain,
Okay.
which is the hemisphere that's more associated with spatial abilities.
Right.
And so they give the example of, like, a couple arguing over a map.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely see that happening.
Right. Like the woman's trying to figure out where to go,
Hi.
and the man's like, just let me do it,
I got it. Yeah.
And they also talk about, like, reverse parking.
Okay.
And they're saying that men are statistically much better at reverse parking than women.
Really?
Yeah. And again, they're saying that this is because of their spatial abilities.
That's fascinating. I wonder if that's why, like, men are always so eager to be the ones driving.
Maybe
It's a primal instinct.
it could be a primal instinct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But then they also go into talking about emotions, and they're saying that men and women's brains process emotions differently.
So this is where, like, the communication breakdowns can really happen in relationships.
Yeah.
Because if men and women are experiencing emotions differently,
Right.
it's going to be hard for them to understand each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're saying that men tend to compartmentalize their emotions,
Okay.
whereas women experience emotions more holistically.
So what does that mean exactly? Like, to compartmentalize emotions?
They're saying that men are kind of like, they have these different compartments in their brain,
Okay.
and they can put their emotions into different compartments.
Okay.
And so they can, like, focus on one thing at a time.
Oh, yeah.
And not let their emotions kind of, like, bleed over into other areas of their life.
Interesting.
Whereas women, they're saying it's more like everything's kind of interconnected.
Yeah.
So if they're feeling stressed at work, it might affect their mood at home.
Right. It all kind of blends together.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so they use the analogy of, like, the rock.
The Rock. Like Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're saying that when men are stressed or overwhelmed,
Okay.
they kind of retreat to their mental rock,
Interesting.
and they process things internally.
So like a cave.
Yeah, like a cave.
They're going into their...
They're going into their
Okay,
cave,
yeah.
and they're just like, okay, I need to figure this out.
Right.
And they're not really thinking about their emotions, or they're not really wanting to talk about them.
So it's like a problem-solving mode.
Yeah, it's like a problem-solving mode.
And they shut down emotionally so that they can focus on finding the solution.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So then how do you, like, talk to a man when he's on his rock?
Well, they're saying that it's important to give them space.
Okay.
Like, don't try to force them to talk about it.
Right.
Just let them have your time.
Let him be on their rock.
Let them be on their rock. And then eventually they'll come out.
They'll come out of the cave.
They'll come out of the cave. And then you can talk to them about it.
Okay. That makes sense.
But it's important to understand that this isn't personal.
Right.
It's not that they don't care.
It's just how they process things.
It's just how they process things.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have to talk about hormones.
Oh, yeah. The hormones.
Right. Because hormones play a huge role in all of this.
Right. They're like the chemical messengers of the body.
Yeah.
They control so much of what we do.
Right. And so they're saying that testosterone and estrogen,
Okay.
which are the male and female hormones respectively,
Right.
they actually shape our brains differently.
So it's not just about our reproductive systems.
Right. It's not just about our reproductive systems. It's about how we think.
It's about how our brains actually develop.
How our brains actually develop. Exactly.
Okay.
And so they're saying that testosterone
Okay.
is linked to traits like aggression,
Okay.
spatial skills,
Right. We talked about that with the map reading.
with the map reading,
Yeah.
and risk-taking behavior.
So that's why men are more likely to, like, do extreme sports and gamble and things like that?
Yeah. And estrogen
Okay.
is associated with empathy,
Okay.
nurturing behavior,
Right.
and a stronger focus on social connections.
So that's why women are more likely to be caretakers and
Right.
focus on relationships.
Yeah. And so they're saying that these hormonal differences
Okay.
actually contribute to the different ways that men and women behave.
Interesting. So it's like nature and nurture are both at play here.
Right.
It's not just one or the other.
It's not just one or the other. It's both.
Yeah.
And so they give the example of like a woman who was on birth control.
Okay.
And she was experiencing all these mood swings.
Right. Because birth control can affect your hormones.
Right. And so she went off birth control.
Okay.
And her mood swings went away.
So it was the hormones that were causing the mood swings.
Yeah. And so they're saying that hormones can have a really powerful effect on us.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah. And so they're saying that it's important to be aware of these hormonal differences and to understand that they can affect our behavior and our thinking.
So it's not just about like men being men and women being women.
Right.
There's actually like a biological basis for some of these differences.
And they're saying that this knowledge can help us to have more empathy for each other.
Right. Because if we understand why someone is behaving the way they are, it's easier to be compassionate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to understand each other better.
Right.
But then they also talk about homosexuality.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really controversial.
Yeah.
They're saying that homosexuality is not just a choice, but that it's actually influenced by hormones during fetal development.
So like in the womb.
In the womb, yeah.
Interesting.
And they're saying that this is why,
you
know, there's a higher likelihood of identical twins both being gay, even if they're raised in completely different environments.
So they're saying it's not just a social construct.
Right. They're saying that there's a biological basis for it.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, a pretty controversial claim.
It is, yeah.
But they're basing this on research.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's something to think about.
It is something to think about for sure.
Yeah. So overall, this book is really fascinating.
It is.
It's definitely thought-provoking.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to understand these differences between men and women.
Right. Because it can help us to communicate better.
Exactly.
And to have more empathy for each other.
Yeah.
And just to understand each other better.
Right. So if you're interested in learning more about this, I highly recommend checking out the book.
Yeah. It's a good read.
It's a really good read. It's called Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps.
Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. By Allan and Barbara Pease.
By Allan and Barbara Pease. And, yeah, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, this was a good one.
This is a fun one.
A lot to think about.
Lots to think about. We'll see you next time.
See you later.